Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Valeria and this is the Off-Road Range. This video is partly an addition and continuation of my big video number 20 about problems and solutions of charity. I consider this video my best work on YouTube. In this video, I not only revealed all the shortcomings of the existing charity system, but also pointed out the facts of unfair distribution of resources, the shortcomings of the current financial system, the worsening of a huge crisis, and the dependence of 99% of people on 1%. And besides this, the most important is that I talked about what kind of charity we should have in order for it to work. In this video, I will talk about the following topics. I will tell you very briefly what my previous video is about, lasting 1.5 hours. I will express criticism of the current structure of charity and the influence of the current structure on the views and actions of an ordinary person. I will talk about the lack of freedom of speech, independent media, and open, honest statistics. About the habit of the population to perceive the deterioration of life as the norm, and about the habit of believing that it is impossible to influence anything. About how charity should really influence if it is organized in the right way. And I will ask you questions for your self-determination in how you are ready to contribute to this world. What is the previous video about? In the video number 20 about charity, I answer many questions. What is meant by charity today? Why does current charity not only not work, but also make the world's problems even more pronounced and acute? Where can we see the result of solving problems and open data on charity spending? The hint: nowhere. They don't exist. How strong a negative impact does it have? Why don't recipient countries become independent and prosperous? How does the so-called charity of business and states lead to their enrichment, while at the same time leading to the impoverishment of the population? How state and business, under the guise of charity, aggravate global problems such as climate change, deforestation, garbage disaster, overproduction, wars, hunger and lack of drinking water, lack of education and medicine, and many others? Why do neither states nor businesses actually engage in charity? And why doesn't it make sense to protect any of them? How does charity act as money laundering? How are ordinary people who criticize the current arrangement made silent? How are the best minds on the planet stopped from self-realization and changing the world for the better? What is real charity? What it should be like? Moreover, you yourself will think about these questions and think whether I'm right in what I say. Therefore, you are definitely welcome to watch this video. Today I will talk about another things. And I recommend you turning on subtitles while watching. And not only on this, but also on other videos. Visual perception of information allows not only better assimilation, but also its analysis. It means that you gradually will acquire your own opinion. Today, charity performs many functions, but not its main one: to do good on earth. Today, charity is just a big word for both states and businesses. Just by using the word charity, a person immediately receives the loyalty from his environment and several points to his social status and the image of a good citizen: kind, responsive, generous, conscious. But those people who really think about existing problems, the reasons for their occurrence, and the logic of their solution, understand that all states, corporations, and any companies and individuals that engage in activities called charity do this only for their own benefit. These are personal brand and reputation growth. Public charity makes people loyal to the company, and business pretends that it understands the problems of ordinary people and is ready to solve them at its own expense. This gives businesses an advantage in their operations, since people will defend those who do good, regardless of whether it is just big words and pretty pictures. diversification of assets, and complicity of connections of legal entities. Complex legal schemes make it possible to create a certain subordination and ownership of charitable companies and startups to the same person. At the same time, the isolation of these legal entities from each other and security during a crisis will be ensured. 3 more consequences follow from this: tax evasion and money laundering, investing in their own companies and research and development, and nepotism. Firstly, donations to its own subsidiary in the form of investments for the development of something mean that the donor company incurs expenses in the form of donations. According to the tax code, they are not taken into account when calculating the taxable base. Secondly, all profits from the developments and activities of subsidiaries are the owner's funds. In addition, if all this profit, according to the documents, goes to reinvestment and R&Ds, then the donor company also reduces the amount of tax payments. Thirdly, such diversity and complex interconnection of legal entities makes it possible to employ all the right people and provide all the necessary activities that occur without reporting, while knowing that employees can be trusted. This is a very short and stripped down description of one of many schemes. This entire structure leads to increased influence in certain markets, and therefore makes it possible lobbying and realizing one's own ambitions, and with sufficient resources, influencing the states and economies of other countries. Having a sufficient amount of money, people, having a strategy and business protection from various occasions, political, economic, social, crisis, trade wars, a person can lobby his interests at the expense of money, services, promises, borrowings, and so on, receiving whatever he needs, no matter whether in an honest and humane way. In a good case, the owner of the companies has power over other countries and make them dependent on him. Why not? After all, the GDP of many countries is much less than the profits of some large corporations. I think that based on this, every person understands why I criticize charity. In its current form, charity vitens and makes excuses for people and companies. Charity is another advantage, an opportunity to continue doing business due to the fact that good deeds supposedly cover the harmful outcomes, due to the fact that philanthropist promises not only to neutralize the consequences of his business, for example, land erosion, water pollution, and so on, but also to create better environmental conditions than before. In reality, for one company, it is impossible to do this, even if it would actually do this. That is, charity hides dirty deeds and deceives ordinary people, confusing them in what certain actions mean. The data is simply hidden or not collected or analyzed at all, so that the owner knows that no one will see this data and he can sleep peacefully. Staged activity and reports create an imitation of activity and convince that this is the correct state of affairs. Charity in its current form launders money, as I said. Despite the absolute digitalization of the financial sector, there are people who know how and what to do correctly, so that money flows either go unnoticed or are carried out as legal activities. Digitalization and analysis of money flows affect only ordinary people and creates huge barriers for their development. We, ordinary people, need to account even for the miserable $200 in order to avoid blocking of accounts. However, corporations are able to make transactions worth of billions, and everything goes smoothly. Charity doesn't solve absolutely any problems, but only aggravate them. It is very easy to draw up reports and hold a couple of seminars a year. In reality, this activity critically pollutes and degrades the ecosystem of the planet, since there is not only a concentration of profits in a narrow circle of people, but also a concentration of problems in various places of the world. For example, garbage disasters, local epidemics due to the lack of hygiene and medicine, wars due to the so-called struggle for freedom, worsening hunger and shortage of clean water, deterioration of the environmental situation, and so on. All this leads to fatal diseases of humanity, and especially in those countries that are helped, since in fact the population of these countries doesn't choose this help. This aid is imposed, making countries dependent on the donor, and as soon as the funding stops, the country's situation becomes even worse, since in fact no values were created within the country. The level of education and medicine didn't become higher. No goods were produced for improving the economy, and so on. At the same time, the country's resources and land were given to the donor for use, worsening environmental and economic situation. When we hear that a family has to survive on $1 a month, many people cannot even imagine this. But this is reality, and it is very far from away the reality we live in and moreover see on social media. But this charity gives hope. It gives hope both to those who receive help and to those who hear and read about this charity. For the first, this is the expectation of free help from someone above them they don't have to do anything for, and this is an accustoming to helpless and inaction. And for ordinary people, this is the illusion that very soon everything will improve, and on its own, without their personal participation. What is the worst thing about this? From a human point of view, it leads to death, low standard of living, early aging, deficiency of nutrients and food in general, water shortage and consumption of contaminated water, contaminated land and poisoned air, lack of hygiene, waste recycling, sewage, low level of medicine, lack of medicines and equipment for treatment, local outbreaks of diseases, lack of jobs, lack of education, distribution and use of alcohol and illegal substances, and, in general, impossibility to live, not survive. All this is not the norm for a person, and no person on earth should either survive like this or slowly die in agony, unable to change the situation around them. And from the point of view of influencing the opinion of an average person, such charity, in my opinion, is either devalued or misleading. In the first case, the person stops believing in solving problems, stops thinking about them at all, believes that his actions do not solve anything, stops believing in goodness, and he himself stops developing, striving to achieve more than the level he is accustomed to, destroying his potential, willpower, and altruistic traits. If charity is misleading, then the person believes that the problems can be solved in the current system of charity in world order, and that someone is successfully solving them for him. Believe that he influences the situation by periodically transferring funds to the account of the selected fund. Believe that his donations are a sufficient contribution to consider himself a good person. Looks for evidence that such charity solves problems, and he finds it. In addition, he instills this in others and refuses to accept another point of view, since it is very difficult to accept the truth. Some people create their own funds. However, in the current system, it has scant chances of developing under the control of the creator with a real improvement of the situation in the world. Most likely, he will encounter people who want his money in one way or another, and as a result, his activities will turn into the same semblance of help, even if unconsciously. Those who look at charity critically, those who independently investigate corruption schemes, can confirm that there are hardly a dozen charitable companies in the world that do not get rich from donations, but direct funds to fight global problems. Independent research itself relies on donations and is at risk from law enforcement, even though it does good, noble things few people are thankful for. It is very difficult to find the truth about the actual activities of organizations, since the information space is designed in such a way that we see only what is necessary for us to see. You will not find either free, truthful information or open, honest statistics. The information space is structured in such a way that most likely you will not be interested in problems and the truth around them at all. I am not sure if there is even one independent media in the world now. The absence of an unbiased media that operates on facts, not manipulation, and operates without intimidation and financial motivation means the absence of true negative events and problems. Digitalization has transformed the existence and perception of information in such a way that if an event is not in the media space, then it doesn't exist as such. If the event that occurred wasn't recorded, published, distributed, then it didn't exist. The reality outside the internet, TV, social networks, advertising is a black box, and we know only what is presented to us. The internet has become a tunnel of reality, a narrow range of phenomena and opinions that we see being inside the reality formed by algorithms. Moreover, often our individual formed reality is very different from the reality of the person next to us, while both realities are only an image that was created artificially and often has nothing in common with the real world, with the way it is structured and what happens in it. Moreover, in order for an event to exist, it doesn't have to exist. Since often we not only cannot verify its reliability, but we also don't want to do this, and most will not even think of questioning any data. In addition, it is not the information that is presented, and it is not the statistics that are showed in official reports that are important. The important data is the data that will be completely transparent from the point of view of voice and at the same time anonymous from the point of view of personality, for the safety of this person and the inability to influence his voice. Official statistics indicate those data, those numbers that are needed for certain tasks or influence. This can be done because there are many ways to partition and account for data, which can be combined in various ways. In some countries, a person cannot even figure out his own taxes, let alone state or international statistics. In addition, the average person has no way to check the accuracy, and those who have access to information are interested in statistics only to achieve their goals, but not for obtaining the truth. There are no transparent, honest statistics, and organizing them requires not only enormous resources, but also opportunities, which are also practically non-existent. When attempting to run such activity, when attempting to independently collect data, it is enough for states or businesses to sign an act. It is enough to block the accounts of a group of enthusiasts. It is enough to threaten loved ones and relatives. And the implementation of independent collection and analysis of data becomes impossible. The lack of independent media and journalists is a historical pattern, since those who have power always eliminate information that undermines authority. Some free information exists in private networks, in networks that do not rely on corporate infrastructure, and on the darknet. However, you need to know how to get into these networks and stay there so that you are safe. You need to know where to look, and this is a huge area for violation of law and order. That is, often anonymous networks have a stamp of crime, which means mistrust on the part of the user. But this is not always so. And of course, you need to search and analyze all the data yourself. And it is advisable to contribute to the replenishment of the database with information. Why don't people notice all this? Firstly, as I said, we are in a small box of constructed reality, and we perceive the shadows of events as the truth. Secondly, 99% of people even don't want to say anything, let alone do anything, so they don't see it. An imitation of freedom is given, and the whole life is clogged with work, routine, and the desire for social status of success, regardless of whether this makes sense in a very short life. Then how can we at least partially look at reality? In my opinion, one of the ways to do this is to answer the question: have we, you, your parents, children, friends, colleagues, started to live better? Answer for real, without pretending that you have enough of what you have, and without using demotivating phrases like "it could be worse." It is enough to open even the current statistics, and no matter how distorted they are, they will already show an incredible deterioration in the quality of life both over the past few decades and the past few years. And people got used to this constant deterioration, got used to the constant rise of prices, the restrictions on what is available, the deterioration in the quality of goods and services. We consider this to be the norm, especially since every time there are justifications for it in the form of force majeure. The market bubble burst, a global epidemic began, another war began, and because of it all prices rose. A mystical enemy appeared which harms the economy, unforeseen natural events and phenomena have occurred, and so on. And if you think carefully, then all these events are presented in such a way that either there is no one to blame for these events at all, or there is someone to be blamed, but no one personally, and certainly not those who tell you about the deterioration of life. As it turns out, these events were unpredictable, impossible to influence, and those in power, on the contrary, are making every effort to save the economy, get out of the crisis, and raise the standard of living. Although in reality, it was they who destroyed the economy, created a crisis, and lowered the level of living. But since outwardly all this looks like events on a global scale, formed by uncontrollable factors, then a person gets used to constant deterioration, constantly adapts and believes that, in general, his standard of living hasn't fallen. A person believes that things the most influential cannot influence and even do everything they can, as we are convinced, then what can we say about the most ordinary person? A person becomes accustomed to helplessness, and not only helplessness regarding events around him, but also regarding his own life and even everyday needs. A continuous flow of information, constant presence on social networks, useless communication lead to a lack of thinking and analysis skills in a modern person, which I talked about in the video number 45 about the influence of advertising. An endless amount of bureaucracy and the need to wait for solutions to our everyday problems from the state and large companies without the opportunity to act root the habit of doing nothing and solving nothing. I talk about the reality of technical support in the video number 51, and this video resonated with viewers more than usual. Since our lives have become worse, and since the world's and our own problems are getting worse, how much should charity really influence? And what does charity have to do with our problems? After you watch this video, please take the time to confirm or deny my words. Find statistics, find errors in logic, contradictions, and even better, save certain data for yourself to compare after a while. Now, any information can be erased from the information field if there are enough opportunities. The task of charity is to ensure that every person can change the world around him for the better, so that every person consciously chooses goodness and chooses to be a creator and not a consumer. This means that a person can also solve his own problems, that a person, by making efforts, can influence the solution of his problems both at the everyday level and at the international level, making a contribution to improving the situation of other people. Because behind the concept of charity is every person who helps or is helped. Charity is not a business or a state. It is people, those who are close to you and those who are in another part of the world, healthy and sick, educated and uneducated, with billions and with nothing, speaking different languages, having different traditions and different structure of society. And we all can influence. So how should real philanthropy make an impact? It must allow the influence of every person and not just those who have money, power, and connections. It must create opportunities for each of us, opportunities to create, self-actualize, change the world. It must make visible and transparent the problems, the strategy for solving them, actions and results without the possibility of replacing concepts, stealing, or making wishful thinking. It must lead to the equality of all people. Now I have to talk about equality and mutual respect between men and women, about equality and mutual respect between the poor and the rich, about equality of opportunity. But I would like it to become so obvious and natural that we wouldn't have to talk about it. Most importantly, charity must gradually, continuously, and step by step move towards solving problems. For example, improving the environmental situation and restoring the nature of planet Earth, eliminating world hunger. And I'm talking not about surviving on bread and water, but about being able to have a nutritious diet. The use of technology for the efficient use of resources, the reduction of resources usage, the reduction of emissions and waste. Increasing the level of education, and not in certain countries and cities, but everywhere. Creation of jobs anywhere on the planet. The emergence of enthusiasts and hardworking, creative people who will have the opportunity to implement their projects and ideas. Absence of corruption, wars, impossibility of concealing such actions. And much, much more. Many problems will not be solved in your lifetime, and even in the lives of your children and grandchildren. But your children and grandchildren will already know what to do, because you will be an example for them. The lack of immediate results, positive consequences only after many years, shouldn't be for you a reason to inaction. Is it possible to make charity like this? It is, but it requires resources, time, money, materials, and people. In order for you to understand what I'm talking about, I will give you just one example to think about. I knew the man. I knew him for more than 4 years. He was dying before my eyes in a pool of his own blood. This man, from the age of 13, earned his living only by his own labor. By 21, he was already a dollar millionaire. At the age of 26, all of his assets exceeded $1 billion. But in any city, town, or village of his motherland, he always helped anyone who asked or needed help, never demanded anything in return, and always, walking down the street, if he saw garbage under his feet, he picked it up and threw it to the trash can. Until we stop considering ourselves more worthy than others, more privileged and significant than others, this world will not change for the better. Remember the main thing in this video. If you want to change the whole world, start from yourself. Do not lie to yourself. Act sincerely. And do not wait that someone will do something for you in order to change the world in the right direction. And at the end, I'd like you to answer a couple of questions. Write down them on the piece of paper. What charity are you willing to take part in? What indicators will confirm to you that charitable activities are truly making a difference in the world? What problems touch your soul the most? How long are you willing to invest and wait for results? Do you understand what contribution you are ready to make, since it is not only financial participation? Only each of us can influence the charity to really start working. Every action has consequences. But more than that, lack of action also has consequences. And since you have the ability to determine and choose your actions, take advantage of this chance in your very short life. If you are ready to participate in social life, I recommend you to watch the video number 20 in order to understand what you may encounter. It was Valeria, the Off-Road Ranch. I wish you all the best and see you soon.